The city never truly slept, but on a bitter winter night like this, it felt as if the streets had finally surrendered to the cold. Snowflakes danced under the flickering glow of streetlights, drifting aimlessly before settling onto the empty sidewalks. Detective Ryan Walker exhaled a slow breath, watching as the warmth of his lungs turned to mist in the frozen air. His boots crunched against the icy pavement as he moved through the quiet back streets of Brooklyn, patrolling an area he had walked 1,000 times before. It was supposed to be his last night on duty before taking a long overdue leave, one he wasn't even sure he'd return from. The NYPD brass had told him to take some time, get his head straight after everything that had happened. He wasn't the same since the accident. How could he be? He had buried the only person in the world who ever truly mattered to him, and now the silence in his apartment had become unbearable. At least out here, in the quiet of the city, he could pretend there was still something worth showing up for. His radio crackled with static, followed by his partner's voice, checking in from the next block over. "Walker, anything?" Ryan clicked the side of his radio. "Nothing yet. Just me, the wind, and a couple of flickering streetlights." He turned down an alley behind an old bar, the kind of place that smelled like whiskey and regret, long after the last patrons had staggered home. The neon sign buzzed overhead, half the letters burnt out, casting a weak glow over the narrow alleyway. As he passed by a row of dumpsters, something made him stop. A sound, so faint, so fragile, that at first he thought he had imagined it. A whimper. Ryan froze, his senses sharpening. The city was full of noises, most of them easy to ignore, but this wasn't the scraping of a rat or the rustle of discarded newspapers shifting in the wind. This was something different, something alive. He moved slowly, his flashlight cutting through the darkness as he stepped closer. The alley smelled of damp cardboard and old beer, the kind of place no one lingered unless they had no choice. He followed the sound, his heart kicking up a beat as the whimper came again. Softer this time, weaker. His beam of light swept across a pile of garbage bags near the far end of the alley, and then he saw it. A small, trembling shape curled up against the base of a dumpster. Ryan lowered his flashlight, his stomach tightening. At first glance, it barely looked like anything at all, a shadow among the filth, unmoving. But as he crouched down, he saw the rise and fall of tiny ribs, barely visible beneath a coat of matted fur. A puppy. His pulse thrummed in his ears. Someone had thrown it away. The pup was barely more than skin and bone, its breathing shallow, its body curled in on itself in a desperate attempt to keep warm. The garbage bags around it had been disturbed, as if it had tried to burrow into them for shelter. The sheer helplessness of it made something twist inside Ryan's chest, a familiar ache he hadn't felt in a long time. "Hey, buddy." His voice was softer than he expected. Carefully, he reached out, but the pup didn't flinch, didn't move at all except for the faint tremble running through its tiny frame. It should have been afraid. Most stray animals would be, especially in a place like this. But this one wasn't. That's what made him hesitate. Ryan shrugged off his jacket, ignoring the sting of cold that bit into his skin. He wrapped it around the pup, lifting it with the gentleness of someone who had once held something fragile and precious in their hands before. The dog's body was frighteningly light, as if it had been starving for days, weeks, maybe. He could feel the faint, uneven rhythm of its heartbeat against his palm. Ryan cradled the pup close to his chest, shielding it from the night air as he turned back toward his patrol car. His breath came out in slow, controlled puffs, but inside, something was unraveling. This wasn't the first abandoned thing he had found in these streets, but for some reason, it felt different. Maybe because, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't just looking at a case to solve. He was looking at something that needed saving. Sliding into the driver's seat, he cranked up the heat, and let the warmth fill the car. The puppy remained motionless in his lap, its tiny body still shaking. But now, at least, there was a sliver of warmth between them. His radio crackled again. "Walker, status?" Ryan hesitated before responding. "I found something," he said, glancing down at the fragile life in his arms. "Something worth sticking around for." He didn't go home that night. Instead, he drove straight to the emergency veterinary clinic, pushing through the glass doors with urgency in his step. The receptionist looked up, startled, but as soon as she saw what he was carrying, she waved him through. A vet in blue scrubs hurried out, her face shifting from concern to determination as she gently took the bundle from his arms. "Where did you find him?" Ryan ran a hand through his hair, the adrenaline still pumping through his system. "Dumpster. Someone left him for dead." The vet's expression darkened. "If you hadn't found him, he wouldn't have made it through the night." Those words sent a strange kind of chill through Ryan. He exhaled slowly, his hands still tingling with the absence of warmth where the pup had been. He knew loss. He knew what it was like to hold something one moment and have it gone the next. But this was different. The vet disappeared into the back, and Ryan found himself standing there, uncertain. He had done his part. The dog was safe. He could leave, but he didn't. He settled into a chair, his gaze fixed on the door the vet had vanished through. He told himself he was just waiting for an update. That was all. But deep down, he knew the truth. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't ready to walk away. The veterinary clinic smelled of antiseptic and freshly brewed coffee, a combination that felt oddly comforting. Ryan sat in the waiting room, arms crossed, his leg bouncing slightly as he tried to shake off the lingering weight of the night. The storm outside had quieted, but the one inside him hadn't. He could still feel the cold from that alley, the fragile rise and fall of the puppy's chest beneath his hands. It had been too close. A soft chime echoed as a door swung open. The vet, Dr. Harper, stepped out, holding a clipboard. Her expression was neutral but tinged with something Ryan couldn't quite place. He stood before she could say anything. "How is he?" Dr. Harper glanced down at her notes before meeting his gaze. "He's stable, but it was close. He's malnourished, severely underweight, and his body temperature was dangerously low when you brought him in. But he's a fighter. He pulled through." Ryan exhaled, only now realizing he had been holding his breath. "And?" She hesitated. "There's something else. I ran a full examination. He has small scars, old ones. He's been through something before. And his muscle tone. It's unusual for a stray. This dog wasn't just wandering the streets. Someone trained him." Ryan frowned. "Trained? Like how?" "His responses to certain stimuli are too precise. When I checked his reflexes, he reacted like a working dog, like he expected commands. This dog isn't just some abandoned pet. He was part of something bigger." Ryan felt a flicker of unease. A dog that had been trained, yet discarded like trash? It didn't sit right. Dr. Harper sighed, shifting her clipboard to the other hand. "Look, he's going to need time. He's exhausted, both physically and mentally. But if you're not planning to keep him, we can find a rescue to take him." The idea of leaving the pup with strangers made something twist inside him. He wasn't a dog person. He barely took care of himself these days. But something about the way he had found the pup, the way he hadn't given up despite being tossed aside, it felt familiar. Ryan ran a hand down his face. "I'll take him. At least for now." Dr. Harper gave him a knowing look, but didn't argue. "He's going to need a name." Ryan glanced through the glass window into the recovery room. The pup was curled up on a blanket, still weak but breathing steadily. He watched as a faint flicker of movement ran through his paws, as if he were running in his dreams. "Storm," Ryan said quietly. "His name is Storm." Bringing Storm home was a decision that should have been temporary. At least that's what Ryan told himself. But from the moment he carried the pup into his apartment, something shifted. The small, fragile creature that had once been barely alive now had a presence, a quiet, unwavering presence that filled the space Ryan hadn't realized had been so empty. At first, Storm spent most of his time sleeping, curled up in the soft bed Ryan had hastily bought from a 24-hour pet store. But even in his weakened state, he seemed hyper-aware of his surroundings. He never let Ryan stray too far, lifting his head whenever he moved, his dark eyes following with an intensity that was both unsettling and comforting. Ryan caught himself talking to him, at first out of habit, then because it felt natural. "You're lucky I found you," he muttered one night as he dropped onto the couch, Storm watching from his bed. "Or maybe I'm the lucky one. Jury's still out." Storm just blinked, then yawned, curling into himself. The real changes started once Storm gained his strength back. He wasn't just some random dog. He had instincts that ran deeper than survival. He responded to movements before they happened, his ears twitching at the smallest shifts in sound. When Ryan tossed a ball absent-mindedly one evening, Storm didn't just chase it. He retrieved it with calculated precision, sitting neatly at Ryan's feet as if waiting for the next command. One night, Ryan woke to the sound of his own breath hitching, the remnants of a nightmare fading into the darkness. It was the same dream, the same crushing weight, the same feeling of helplessness he had carried for months. He hadn't realized how heavy the silence was until he felt warmth press against him. Storm had moved from his bed and was sitting beside the couch, his head resting gently against Ryan's knee. He wasn't whining or nudging, just there, steady and real in a way Ryan hadn't known he needed. Ryan swallowed, his throat tight. "You're something else, aren't you?" Storm didn't move, didn't blink, just stayed. Days turned into weeks, and Ryan found himself adjusting to a rhythm that wasn't just his own. Mornings were no longer silent. They were filled with the soft click of Storm's paws against the hardwood floor, the occasional sigh as he stretched out beside Ryan's feet. The apartment, once a place of solitude, felt lived in. Storm was growing stronger every day, his coat glossier, his energy returning in full force. But with that strength came more questions. Ryan noticed it in the way Storm moved. His posture was disciplined, his reactions sharp. He wasn't just smart, he was trained. Ryan tested it one night. He stood in the middle of the living room, hands on his hips, and gave a simple command. "Sit." Storm obeyed instantly. Ryan narrowed his eyes. "Stay." The dog didn't budge. Then, without thinking, he said, "Search." Something shifted in Storm's expression. His ears perked, his body tensed, and he moved, methodically, purposefully, sweeping the apartment as if scanning for a hidden threat. Ryan's stomach tightened. Storm hadn't just been someone's pet, he had been something more, but if he had been trained for something, why had he been thrown away? That question lingered in Ryan's mind as he watched Storm settle back down, stretching out beside the couch with a content sigh. He had been in law enforcement long enough to know that answers weren't always easy to find. But as he reached down, ruffling the dog's fur, he realized something else. For the first time in a long time, the silence in his life didn't feel so suffocating. Storm wasn't just a dog, he was a survivor. And maybe, just maybe, so was Ryan. The city had changed, but Ryan and Storm had changed with it. 3 years had passed since that freezing night in the alley, and the battered, half-starved pup that Ryan had rescued had become something extraordinary. Storm wasn't just a pet. He was a partner, a legend in the NYPD's K-9 unit. Together, they had built a reputation that even the toughest officers respected. Storm wasn't just fast, he was precise. He wasn't just smart, he was instinctive. And most of all, he was fearless. Ryan had learned to trust those instincts without hesitation. Storm had led him through hostage situations, drug busts, and missing person cases. There were nights when Ryan wondered if the dog had saved him more times than he had saved Storm. Maybe that was why, when the call came in, he felt it before he even processed the words. "Walker!" The dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio, urgent and clipped. "We've got a code 27 at Central Park. Kid's been missing for 2 hours. No leads. Parents are panicked." Ryan was already moving. "Send me the details." He didn't need to look to know that Storm was already alert in the passenger seat, ears perked, his body tense. He felt it too. By the time Ryan pulled up to the park, red and blue lights were cutting through the night, illuminating desperate faces. Officers moved in controlled urgency, combing through bushes, questioning anyone who might have seen something. The boy's mother stood near a patrol car, her face pale, her hands clutching at nothing. Ryan stepped out, and the lead officer approached. 7-year-old boy, name's Oliver Reed. He was playing near the carousel. His mom looked away for 2 minutes and he was gone. No signs of a struggle, no witnesses, nothing. 2 minutes. That was all it took. Ryan knelt beside Storm, reaching into the evidence bag an officer handed him. A small blue jacket, still warm with the boy's scent. He let Storm sniff it, his dark nose twitching as he absorbed every detail. Then, without hesitation, Storm tensed, his ears pinned forward, his muscles coiled, and in the next instant, he ran. Ryan barely had time to react before he was sprinting after him. "Storm's got something!" he shouted, and the team scrambled to follow. Storm cut through the manicured paths of the park, dodging trees, weaving past statues and benches, moving too fast for a casual runaway. He wasn't just tracking Oliver. He was chasing something. Ryan's pulse pounded. "What do you see, boy?" Storm suddenly veered off the main path, heading toward the dense trees that lined the park's northern edge. It was the kind of place that swallowed sound, where the city lights didn't quite reach. Ryan slowed as Storm came to an abrupt stop, his body rigid, his breath coming in sharp huffs. His nose was low, tracing the ground, his tail straight like a pointer locking onto a target. Ryan crouched beside him. The ground was disturbed, not natural, more like something had been moved recently. Storm circled the spot, then suddenly let out a deep guttural growl. The kind Ryan had only heard once before, when Storm had cornered a suspect with a gun. Something was here. Ryan waved the team forward. "We need to start digging." Shovels appeared within minutes, and the team worked fast. The earth was loose, shifting unnaturally beneath their hands until... metal. The scraping sound was unmistakable. An officer wiped the dirt away, revealing a rusted, hinged slab of metal, nearly invisible beneath the leaves and debris. A hatch. Ryan's stomach clenched. No one builds a hidden hatch in the middle of Central Park for no reason. Storm whined, pawing at the ground impatiently. Ryan reached for his radio. "This just turned into something bigger. We've got a hidden entrance. Requesting backup." The moment the hatch was pried open, a rush of stale, damp air escaped, the kind of air that hadn't been disturbed in a long time. Storm barked once, short, sharp, ready. Ryan's grip on his flashlight tightened as he peered inside. A tunnel. It stretched downward, barely wide enough for a person to move through. The walls were lined with old cement, cracks running along the edges. It wasn't part of the city's sewer system. This was something else. Ryan turned to the officers. "I'm going in first. Storm's with me." The lieutenant didn't argue. No one did. Ryan slid down carefully, his boots hitting the damp ground with a soft thud. Storm landed beside him, immediately scanning the darkness, his ears shifting with every distant noise. The tunnel was longer than expected, extending far beyond what should have been possible beneath the park. Ryan moved forward cautiously, gun drawn. The deeper they went, the more he noticed something was off. There were marks on the walls, recent ones. Scuff marks like something had been dragged through. Storm stopped suddenly. His nose flared, his body locked up. Ryan felt his heart skip. "Storm," The dog's tail lifted, his stance lowering slightly, the way he always did before a takedown. Then he barked, short and sharp. Ryan's flashlight swept ahead. A door. A heavy, steel door partially ajar. Ryan moved carefully, pressing against the cold metal, pushing it open just enough to slip inside. The room beyond was wrong. Old storage crates lined the walls, but the air was thick with something more than just dust. Ryan's light passed over scattered papers, old notebooks filled with symbols he didn't recognize. On the far side, a table sat covered in tools, files, and something that made his stomach tighten. A kid's shoe. Blue. Small. Matching the description of what Oliver had been wearing. Storm growled low. Ryan's breath came slow and controlled. The shoe was here. The tunnel. The hatch. This wasn't just a runaway case. This was organized. His radio crackled. "Walker, we got confirmation. FBI's been investigating an underground network in the area. This might be connected." Connected? To what? A noise. Ryan turned sharply, gun raised. Storm reacted in tandem, shifting into an attack stance. From the far corner of the room, behind an overturned crate. A whisper. A whimper. Ryan's pulse thundered. He knew that sound. It was the same sound Storm had made 3 years ago when Ryan had found him abandoned in the alley. Storm moved first, crossing the room with shocking speed. He stopped near the crate, whining, his body low, his tail wagging slightly in an unmistakable reassurance. Ryan approached slowly, his breath held, and then a small, trembling figure emerged. A boy, covered in dirt, his clothes torn, but alive. Oliver. Ryan's radio buzzed again. "We're moving in. What's your status?" Ryan didn't take his eyes off the boy. He didn't lower his gun. His heart pounded as Oliver lifted his tear-streaked face, his lips trembling as he whispered a single word. "They're coming," Storm growled, pressing closer to Ryan. Outside, a metallic click echoed from the tunnel behind them. The door had just locked. Ryan's grip on his gun tightened. They weren't alone. The air in the tunnel was thick, heavy with the weight of something unseen. Ryan kept his gun steady, his breath measured, but his pulse was racing. Storm remained tense at his side, ears perked, tail stiff, body coiled like a spring waiting to release. Oliver's wide, terrified eyes darted to the entrance behind them, where the faintest metallic click had echoed moments before. Someone had locked them in. Someone was still here. Ryan crouched beside the boy, his voice low and firm. "Oliver, did you see who brought you here?" The child swallowed, his small frame trembling. "They wore masks, but one of them, he didn't talk like the others. He told them what to do." Ryan's jaw clenched. That was enough. He reached for his radio, but static filled his earpiece. Jammed. He wasn't getting a signal down here. He turned to the walls, scanning the crates, the old electrical wires running along the ceiling. This place had been used before. Recently. Storm's low growl sent a chill through him. The dog's stance shifted, not defensive, but warning. He had felt something coming before Ryan even registered it. That instinct had saved Ryan's life more times than he could count, and now he wasn't about to ignore it. "Storm, what is it?" The dog's body vibrated with tension. His eyes locked onto the doorway leading further down the tunnel, ears flicking at every sound. A voice. A whisper of movement. Ryan grabbed Oliver's hand and pulled him behind a stack of crates. He pressed a finger to his lips, signaling the boy to stay quiet. Then he moved, slow and careful, his gun raised as he approached the shadows beyond the dim light. Storm stayed close, a silent sentinel beside him. Nothing. No movement. No figures in the darkness. Just the cold stillness of a place that shouldn't exist. But Ryan knew better. He had been doing this too long to believe that silence meant safety. Then a voice. "You weren't supposed to find this place so soon." It was deep, smooth, calculated. It didn't come from the darkness. It came from above. Ryan's eyes shot up, tracking the rafters, where a faint shimmer of movement gave away a hidden vantage point. Storm barked sharply, a single warning sound, but the voice didn't flinch. "You're ruining something carefully built, Detective." Ryan tightened his grip on the gun. "Come down and we'll talk about that." A soft chuckle echoed through the space. "I don't think so." Ryan took a step forward, but Storm shifted, blocking him. The dog's instincts screamed danger, and Ryan had learned to trust that feeling. The voice continued, unbothered. "I've been watching you. Watching him." A pause. "That dog of yours? He's a survivor. Impressive, really. But he doesn't belong to you." Ryan's fingers twitched on the trigger. His blood ran cold. "You're the one who left him to die." A slow exhale. "Not exactly. He was discarded, yes, but not by me. He was supposed to be part of something bigger. A machine, a design. But he wasn't strong enough. Or maybe he was too strong." Ryan felt something sharp settle in his chest. The implications were clear. Storm had been designed for something, trained for a purpose, and when he hadn't fit their mold, he had been tossed aside. But what if they had never stopped looking for him? The voice continued, calm as ever. "You've been getting too close, Walker. Finding Oliver was a mistake. You should have walked away." Ryan stepped forward. "You don't get to decide that." Another pause. "Number. But I do decide what happens next." The lights in the tunnel flickered. A hissing sound filled the air. Storm barked, snapping his head toward a vent near the floor. Ryan caught the faintest scent. Something chemical. Something wrong. Gas. "Move!" Ryan shouted, grabbing Oliver and sprinting toward the entrance. Storm bolted ahead, his instincts kicking in before Ryan even had to command him. The moment they reached the door, Ryan slammed his shoulder into it. Locked. He turned, scanning the walls, searching for a release, anything. The gas was already creeping into his lungs, burning the edges of his throat. Then Storm jumped. He lunged toward a rusted air grate near the ceiling, paws clawing at the metal. Ryan didn't hesitate. He holstered his gun, climbed onto a crate, and with every ounce of strength pried the vent open. Cold night air rushed in. It was small, barely wide enough, but it was their only chance. He shoved Oliver in first. "Go! Crawl forward! Don't stop!" Storm was next. The dog hesitated for half a second, his loyalty warring with instinct before squeezing inside. Ryan took one last breath, then pulled himself in, dragging the vent shut behind him. Below, the tunnel filled with gas. They emerged in an abandoned lot behind a warehouse. The sky was dark, the street eerily quiet. Ryan sucked in deep gulps of clean air, Oliver coughing beside him. Storm stood, panting, but his eyes were locked onto something in the distance. Ryan turned. On the opposite rooftop, silhouetted against the city lights, stood a lone figure. Dressed in black, face obscured by shadows, watching them. Ryan's chest tightened. Storm growled. Then, as if satisfied, the figure tilted his head, a slow, deliberate motion, before stepping back into the darkness. Gone. Ryan's radio crackled to life. "Walker, do you copy?" He pressed the call button. "I'm here." "What the hell happened? We lost your signal." Ryan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. His lungs still burned, his pulse still raced, but his mind was sharper than ever. "I think we just met the architect." Silence. Then, the captain's voice, low and grim. "Get back to the station, now!" Ryan reached down, running a hand along Storm's back. The dog was still watching the rooftop, muscles tight, his breath measured. Storm had known before Ryan did. He had sensed it. The same way he had sensed something wrong that first night in the alley, the same way he had never truly shaken whatever past he had escaped. Ryan straightened, his jaw set. He wasn't walking away. Not now. Not ever. The warehouse loomed in the darkness, an imposing relic of the past, abandoned yet eerily untouched by time. Ryan sat in his car, hands clenched tightly around the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the crumbling structure ahead. Every lead he had followed, every whisper he had chased, had brought him here. Storm had been taken, and Ryan wasn't leaving without him. Storm was more than a partner. He was family. The thought of him locked away, possibly in danger, sent a wave of frustration through Ryan like he hadn't felt in years. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap. The architect wanted him to come, wanted him to walk straight into whatever lay beyond those rusted doors. But Ryan didn't care. If there was even a sliver of a chance to get Storm back, he would take it. He checked his gear one final time before stepping into the cold night air. The warehouse stood silent, the only noise the faint hum of the city in the distance. As Ryan moved closer, the stillness felt wrong, too calculated. A single light flickered inside, casting long shadows against the dust-covered windows. Someone was waiting. Ryan took a slow breath and pushed forward, boots crunching against the gravel. He opened the door, which creaked loudly, revealing a cavernous space filled with rusted equipment and crates. He moved cautiously, sweeping his flashlight across the room. Then came a low growl. "Storm?" Ryan's voice was steady, but his grip on his weapon tightened. Suddenly a flash of light, a sharp click, and the world exploded around him. A deafening blast sent him sprawling backward, heat and dust filling the air. As smoke engulfed the room, Ryan pushed through the haze, coughing violently. This was an ambush. Figures appeared through the smoke, masked and dressed in black, moving with precision. Ryan raised his weapon, but they weren't focused on him. They were searching for Storm. A sharp bark pierced the smoke, followed by the sounds of a struggle. Ryan's heart raced as his eyes scanned the room. Through the haze, he saw Storm, fighting back, teeth bared, body low, a warning in his stance. Storm had broken free and was holding his ground, but there were too many attackers. Ryan moved, but the moment he stepped forward, another figure struck, shoving him back against a crate. His head snapped to the side, pain flaring at his temple. He fought back, forcing the attacker off him, but his vision swam for a moment, just long enough for him to hear something that made his blood run cold. A command, a single word, and then silence. Storm, who had been snarling just seconds before, suddenly hesitated. His body stiffened, ears flicking in confusion. He recognized the voice. Ryan's stomach dropped. They hadn't just taken him. They had tried to reprogram him. Before Ryan could reach him, a net was thrown over Storm. He thrashed, his powerful muscles working to break free, but the material tightened, restricting his movement. "No!" Ryan pushed forward, but another force hit him hard from the side, knocking him off balance. Storm let out a sharp whine as the attackers pulled him back, dragging him toward a waiting vehicle just outside. His eyes locked onto Ryan's, and for the first time, Ryan saw something in them he had never seen before: fear. Ryan fought with everything he had, but he was outnumbered. His vision blurred again as he took another hit, sending him to the ground. By the time he pushed himself up, the sound of tires screeching filled the air. The vehicle was pulling away. Storm was gone. Ryan stumbled forward, barely registering the ache in his body. The smoke was beginning to clear, the warehouse eerily silent once again. Then, movement near his feet. A small, crumpled piece of paper. His breath came hard and fast as he bent down, fingers shaking as he unfolded it. A message. "We're taking back what's ours." Ryan's hands curled into fists, the note crumpling in his grip. Storm wasn't just a target. He was the endgame, and Ryan was going to bring him home, no matter what it took. Ryan didn't sleep. He hadn't since Storm was taken. Every second that passed without him felt like a weight pressing down on his chest, heavy and suffocating. His apartment was too quiet, too empty. The dog bed in the corner was untouched, the food bowl still full. But Storm wasn't dead. No, Ryan refused to accept that. Storm had fought too hard, survived too much. He wasn't gone. He was waiting, and Ryan was going to bring him home. Days blurred together as Ryan dug deeper, piecing together the fragments of a mystery that had haunted him since the moment he found Storm in that alley. The architect wasn't just another criminal. He was calculated, a mastermind who had built his empire in the shadows, manipulating people, animals, entire systems to his advantage. He had created a program, one designed to train and sell high-intelligence, high-discipline dogs to the highest bidder. But the ones that failed, the ones that didn't meet the brutal standards, were discarded. Storm had been one of them. Ryan traced the project back to a hidden facility, buried deep in the outskirts of the city. Officially, it didn't exist. Unofficially, it was a breeding ground for something far darker than just trained dogs. The architect's operations stretched beyond animal trafficking. He had been using these animals for covert operations, illegal security, and underground fights. And if Storm had been brought back, it wasn't out of sentiment. It was because the architect believed he still had use for him. That was all Ryan needed to know. The FBI had been circling the architect for years, but they had never had enough to bring him down. Now they did. With the location pinpointed, the raid was set. They were going in heavy, tactical units, SWAT, K9 teams, all prepared for the worst. But for Ryan, there was only one goal: get Storm back. The night of the operation, rain pounded against the asphalt as the convoy of black SUVs rolled through the darkness. The facility loomed ahead, a fortress of reinforced steel and surveillance cameras. The architect had built this place to be impenetrable, but he hadn't planned for this. Ryan adjusted his bulletproof vest, checking his gear one last time. His fingers trembled, not with fear, but with the sheer force of his determination. The command was given. The teams moved in. Explosions rocked the compound as doors were breached, flashbangs illuminating the dark corridors. Shouts, gunfire, chaos. But Ryan only focused on one thing: the cages. Through the smoke, through the flashing lights, he saw them. Rows of kennels, metal doors lined against the walls, dozens of dogs trapped inside. Some barked, some whimpered, some stayed silent, their eyes dull from whatever horrors they had endured. Ryan's stomach twisted. He couldn't save them all, but he could save him. Then, movement. A deeper, familiar snarl cut through the noise. Ryan turned sharply, just in time to see a black-muzzled Labrador launch forward, teeth bared, slamming into a masked handler trying to escape. Storm. Ryan felt something inside him snap. Storm! The dog's ears flicked toward him, a brief flash of recognition through the haze of instinct and adrenaline. Storm had been injured. Blood matted his fur, his body tense with exhaustion, but he was still fighting. He always had been. Before Ryan could get to him, another guard raised a stun baton. Ryan fired. The man collapsed, the weapon clattering to the ground. Storm stumbled back, his legs shaking, but Ryan was already there, dropping to his knees, his hands finding the familiar warmth of Storm's fur. "Hey, buddy," he breathed. Storm whined, pressing his head into Ryan's chest, but there was no time. More gunfire, more shouts. Then, a slow, deliberate clap. Ryan turned, his gun snapping up. At the end of the hall stood the architect, dressed in black, calm, untouched by the chaos around him. "Impressive," he mused, his voice as smooth as ever. "I expected you to come, but I didn't think you'd make it this far." Ryan's finger tightened on the trigger. "It's over," the architect chuckled. "Oh, Walker, you think you've won?" He gestured toward Storm. "You don't even realize what you've stolen from me. That dog, he was meant for something greater. And now look at him. A pet? A disappointment. Storm growled low, his body pressing against Ryan's side. Ryan didn't hesitate. Yeah? Well, this disappointment just helped take you down. Sirens wailed outside. More agents flooded the halls. The architect's smug expression faltered just slightly. For the first time, he had lost control. Ryan stepped forward, his gun never wavering. You don't own him. You never did. The architect smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That's what you think. Then he moved, too fast, reaching for something in his coat. Storm reacted first. The dog lunged, taking the architect down in one fluid motion, his jaws locking onto his wrist before he could draw his weapon. The man screamed, but Storm didn't let go. Not this time, not ever again. The architect was wrestled to the ground by agents, his struggling futile. Ryan exhaled sharply, looking down at Storm. The dog was panting, blood staining his coat, but his tail wagged weakly. He had chosen. He had always chosen. 2 weeks later, the city was buzzing with the fallout of the raid. The architect's empire had crumbled overnight. His operations were exposed, his network dismantled. The dogs rescued from the facility were being rehabilitated, given second chances, the chances they had never been meant to have. And Storm? Storm was a hero. At the NYPD K-9 ceremony, officers, handlers, and reporters filled the hall. Ryan stood beside Storm, his uniform crisp, his wounds mostly healed. Storm sat at his side, looking healthier than ever, his fur sleek, his eyes bright. The commissioner stepped forward, clearing his throat. For extraordinary bravery, loyalty, and service, we are proud to award K-9 Storm the Medal of Valor. Applause erupted. Cameras flashed, but Ryan wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at Storm. The dog turned his head up to him, and for a moment, it was just them. The same way it had been in that alley, the same way it had been through every battle, every fight, every quiet moment in between. Ryan knelt, brushing his fingers against Storm's fur. You did it, buddy. Storm licked his hand, tail thumping lightly against the stage. Then a small body crashed into them. Oliver. The boy wrapped his arms around Storm's neck, burying his face in his fur. You're okay, he whispered. Storm nudged him gently, his tail wagging harder. Ryan watched them, something deep in his chest finally settling. He reached out, ruffling Oliver's hair. You ready to go home? Oliver looked up at him, smiling through his tears. Yeah. Ryan exhaled. For the first time in years, the word didn't feel hollow. He stood, glancing down at Storm. Come on, partner, let's go home. Storm lifted his head, eyes full of something Ryan had seen before. Not just loyalty, not just trust. Love. As they walked off the stage, Oliver's hand in his, Storm at his side, Ryan knew one thing for certain. He hadn't just saved Storm, Storm had saved him. At its core, this story is about more than just a detective and his dog. It's about survival, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between those who refuse to give up on each other. Ryan and Storm were both abandoned in different ways, one by tragedy, the other by a system that saw him as disposable. But instead of letting their past define them, they found strength in each other. Storm wasn't just another K-9 officer. He was proof that even those cast aside can rise to something greater. He was meant to be a tool, trained for a purpose that disregarded his loyalty, his intelligence, his heart. But Ryan saw him for what he truly was: a partner, a protector, and most importantly, family. This story is a testament to the idea that love, trust, and unwavering determination can break cycles of cruelty. The architect operated in shadows, manipulating lives, treating people and animals alike as commodities. But in the end, it wasn't just law enforcement that stopped him. It was the loyalty of a dog and the relentless will of a man who refused to let him go. Storm's redemption wasn't just about being saved. It was about proving that he had value beyond what he was trained for. And in saving Storm, Ryan found his own redemption too. He started as a man drowning in his past, but by the end, he had something worth fighting for. A purpose. A family. Because sometimes the ones we save are the ones who save us right back. Share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story. Together, we can shine a light on the power of doing what's right. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.